Hey, what's up, all you Instacart shoppers out there? I'm Chad the Gig Economist, and if you've been following me for a while, you know I've been making videos about Instacart for a year and a half. I try to make my videos as positive as possible because I want to help you guys become better Instacart shoppers. Even when I make videos ripping Instacart, I do so to both warn and educate shoppers in the process. But this time I'm turning my attention to some, not all, but some, of you shoppers who are either misinformed or simply ignorant as to how Instacart really works. I keep seeing the same few complaints and misconceptions repeated on Reddit, in Facebook groups, and of course in the YouTube comment sections. I'm not making this video to be a condescending jerk, it's more like a matter of tough love. So if you feel like you can handle hearing 5 harsh truths about Instacart, keep watching. When the coronavirus panic started, tech and news websites started running stories equating gig workers with first responders. Even Instacart themselves called us household heroes. Apparently, a lot of shoppers bought into this propaganda because the amount of self aggrandizing I've seen has been nuts. Some of y'all just cannot pat yourselves on the back hard enough. But that's nothing compared to some of those shoppers who are convinced all Instacart customers will either starve to death or catch the coronavirus and die if it weren't for them. In fact, these people pity their customers so much that they're willing to accept any batch they can get because they think it's a matter of life and death. It's nice you want to look out for your customers, but please consider the fact that Instacart is not a food bank that delivers. The vast majority of Instacart customers are doing quite well if they can afford a luxury service that charges marked up prices, service fees, and delivery fees before they even add their tip. And by luxury, I don't mean that it's only for the wealthy elite, but that it's not an absolute necessity for survival, and it is a little frivolous if you think about it. If you want to help people who truly are in need, then please volunteer with an actual charity. I'm sure they could really use the help. Otherwise, you need to accept the fact that being an Instacart shopper is a money-making endeavor, and all the customers will be okay if you don't accept their order. Go into any Facebook or Reddit group for Instacart shoppers, and I guarantee you'll see screenshots of low-paying, high-item, long-distance, no-tip batches with a caption along the lines of, "Who would take this?" The vast majority of the comments will echo the OP sentiment, but someone will say they've accepted a batch like that before and they wound up getting a huge tip afterwards, so they don't see what the problem is. Whether you're accepting bad batches out of pity or because you like to gamble on getting a post-delivery tip, you need to realize accepting bad batches hurts every shopper in the long run. The algorithm Instacart uses to determine payouts works on the concept of machine learning. For every batch that you accept, you teach the algorithm what you consider to be an acceptable payment for the time, mileage, and labor involved. When shoppers accept bad batches in mass, it brings wages down across the board. If a batch sits in the queue, Instacart will eventually add a peak boost to incentivize someone to take it. This teaches the algorithm what the pay for the batch should have been. Again, if enough people do this consistently, we might actually be able to reprogram the algorithm towards preferable batch pay. As for humans, it's a lot more nuanced. Trying to get someone who doesn't believe in tipping to start tipping is a path of extreme resistance. One theory is if their orders are consistently late and or they receive poor service, they might realize it's because they didn't incentivize the shopper with a pre-tip and then they start tipping. Of course, another theory is if they consistently receive lousy service, it will just reinforce their belief in not tipping and they never do it. Whatever the case may be, most batches without an upfront tip are statistically likely to stay that way, so unless Instacart's payment alone makes it worthwhile, which is extremely rare, do not gamble on no-tip batches. I was one of the first prominent Instacart shoppers to sound the alarm about bots infecting the platform. However, I don't think bots are entirely to blame for the difficulty in getting batches these days. From what I can gather, it's a pretty small minority of shoppers using bots, probably as little as 5% or less. It's just logistically impossible for a tiny fraction of shoppers to complete the vast majority of orders. If you saw my interview with the cybersecurity professor, he described how the bots take batches from the server before they're even offered up to the queue. But when you see batches in the on-demand queue appear and disappear in the blink of an eye, you probably assume they were taken by bots. No human can be swiping this fast, right? Well, it's not quite that simple. The on-demand queue is not 100% live 100% of the time. What you're seeing is actually a replay of something that happened a few seconds ago. A few seconds might not sound like a lot of time, but it's an eternity in terms of computing time. Even if you repeatedly swipe to refresh the queue, there's still a delay. The amount of lag can depend on technical factors like whether your carrier uses 4G or 5G, how strong your signal is, how fast your phone's processor is, and how up to date your app is. In order to get a batch before everyone else, your phone has to refresh at the exact moment the server offers the batch to the queue. Of course, this problem wouldn't exist if Instacart hadn't flooded the market with over 500,000 new shoppers since the coronavirus panic started. Instacart may have as many as 750,000 shoppers right now. There's no way customer demand can justify such a massive fleet of shoppers, even at the height of the pandemic. So the real reason batches disappear so quickly is because there are dozens, maybe hundreds, maybe even thousands of people in your zone right now tapping and swiping as fast as possible. I doubt Instacart servers can keep up with all the incoming traffic, which is why the queue is always a few seconds behind real time. Getting a batch these days is a matter of milliseconds and luck. Tip baiting has become such a boogeyman that it's actually come to the attention of the federal government. 4 senators recently instructed the Federal Trade Commission to launch an investigation into tip baiting. Instacart immediately responded by making some changes like reducing the customer's tip changing window, requiring feedback on low ratings, and even banning customers who are repeatedly accused of tip baiting. Most shoppers seemed happy with these changes, but some are still skeptical. Tip baiting is one of those scary events everyone worries about, but is statistically unlikely to happen, like shark attacks and plane crashes. Let me show you what I mean. Here's a spreadsheet I use to keep track of all 1,208 batches I completed in 2019. I have them sorted by the difference between what I actually made compared to what the initial batch offer was. As you can see, there are about a dozen instances in which the customer either reduced their tip significantly or retracted it altogether. The most I lost was $11.21. Another customer removed their in-app tip but gave me $20 cash tip at the door, so that shouldn't even count. In fact, I think these orders with the reduced tips were just a matter of the tip decreasing because the customer tipped proportionately and I had to refund some of their items, so these shouldn't even count either. Everything else is in the $2 to $6 range, which certainly sucks to lose out on, but these might have been genuinely dissatisfied customers rather than diabolical tip baiters. Even if we count all 12 of these batches as tip baiting incidents, they only account for less than 1% of all batches in the entire year. The real rate is closer to 0.5%, which is what Instacart says the national average is. So why are shoppers so worried about tip baiting when they have a 99% chance of not being tip baited? It's the echo chamber effect. Even though you see what looks like a lot of people talking about tip baiting in the Facebook and Reddit groups, you have to consider that they only account for a small percentage of all shoppers. Our brain sees these posts and assumes they must represent a much larger sample size than they actually do, and concludes that tip baiting must be happening to everyone all the time. I'm not saying tip baiting will never happen to you, but if you use a little common sense, you should be able to identify tip baiting immediately. A good rule of thumb is to be skeptical of any batch where the customer pre-tips $20 or more. As the old saying goes, if it's too good to be true, it probably is. In the last few weeks, Instacart has been announcing changes to the platform now that the coronavirus panic is subsiding, at least a little. They're going back to prioritizing batches based on a shopper's rating, and in certain markets, they're experimenting with offering batches directly to shoppers instead of having a free-for-all open queue. These moves are probably Instacart's way of fighting back against bot users and unauthorized shoppers, but I'm not convinced they're going to do all that much. Even if by some miracle Instacart was able to purge both the bots and the unauthorized shoppers, it still doesn't address the fact that the shopper pool is ridiculously oversaturated. It's possible there might not actually be 750,000 shoppers, but it's clear there are way more shoppers than are truly needed. I'm sure some shoppers will go back to their day jobs eventually, but I can't imagine Instacart has much interest in purging several 100,000 shoppers anytime soon. Since we're not employees, we're not guaranteed worker benefits. Therefore, it doesn't cost Instacart anything to have a fleet of part-time shoppers who only get paid when they're lucky enough to get a batch. The very fact you're watching this video right now means you're a little wiser than the average shopper. Hopefully this video gave you some insight you might not have considered otherwise. I'm sure some of you will disagree with my takes and maybe present a different point of view I hadn't considered. That being said, I think we can all agree this is a chaotic time to be an Instacart shopper, and it's difficult to predict the future right now. By the way, if you want to get my spreadsheets and plug in your own data, they're available for sale at my website, and there's a link in the description and in the top comment below. There's a link to a video explaining how to use them somewhere on the screen here, so click on that for a complete walkthrough. As always, thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.